everybody, welcome back to Biblical Greek Made Easy. This is class 11 of Module 2, and today's the second class period in a row. We're going to talk about participles. We're going to give you all the information you need to know. And remember, participles are complex because they're combining the world of verbs, which we've learned, with the world of nouns, which we left back in Module 1. And so we're pushing those two worlds together, and for that reason, they're important, they're complex, but they just show up a lot in the New Testament, and so we need to be able to translate them in order to translate the New Testament, okay? It's very important. And so here's the scripture verse of the day, okay? The verse of the day is Matthew 5:9 that says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." That's from the Sermon on the Mount. You may recognize that, where Jesus in his first sermon in Matthew is going to say, "Blessed are the poor, and blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are the meek," that sort of thing. And the reason I've chosen this scripture verse today, first of all, peace and peacemaking is super important, and I encourage you in that endeavor. I try to be a peacemaker myself, but grammatically in that verse, we have a participle, and once again, it's hiding. We don't necessarily see it there in the English, but we're going to find out how that works today, and we're going to do a deep dive into that. Okay, so stay tuned, and we'll see how that plays a part. Here's the tip of the day, okay? The tip of the day is, if you want to practice participles, keep translating the New Testament, okay? We talked last time about how when you get to this point of translation ability, when you're translating the New Testament, it might seem like every fifth word or so is a participle. And so that's the encouragement. Just spend time translating, and when you encounter participles, deal with them on their own terms. And it's okay if you get stuck every now and then. You got to check something, you got to look something up. That's part of the process of translating Greek, is learning more and more, getting more comfortable. And you're going to mess up, you're going to get things wrong. That's part of the deal. That's how we learn, okay? So let me encourage you to keep going. So let's go ahead and talk about why this matters, okay? So today we're going to finish learning participles, and to do that is just so key in your ability to read and translate Greek, okay? And today we're going to learn perfect participles. Last class period we learned present participles and aorist participles. And remember, we're using those tense words to really talk about aspect. We're not talking about the time element so much because we're outside of the indicative mood, but we're more talking about aspect. So we're using those tense words in that way. We're going to talk about perfect participles today. We're also going to learn a few syntactical elements that are going to help improve our translation. And actually, one of these we've bounced out to a bonus video. Okay, I've got a short bonus video where I talk about conditional sentences, which can be really helpful. It's important for you to know conditional sentences, but I made its own bonus video this week just because this lesson was getting kind of long, and I didn't want to overburden you. Okay, so this way you can do it in some bite-sized chunks. Watch the conditional sentences video at your leisure, and that'll help you with conditional sentences, okay? So remember, when we talk about the usage of participles, there's two basic uses, okay? One is what we call the adverbial participle. Okay, this is what we learned last time. This is where a participle is going to modify a verb. It's going to piggyback or relate to a verb somehow. Now, if you take a third semester Greek class, you learn more about the syntactical relationships that participles and nouns and all those have with each other, and there's a whole bunch of options, ways to understand that. But the adverbial participle is going to relate to the verb in some way. And so the example we looked at last time, answering the crowd, Jesus said, ... right? We see this sort of thing a lot, where there's Jesus said, the he said, apen, is going to be the primary verb. It's the main verb of the sentence. The answering is adding on to that. It's telling us something about the saying. So answering us is telling us how Jesus was speaking. It's repeating that sort of idea. And again, this is all over the place in Hebrew. Hebrew loves these double-up verbs. And so we see the Koine Greek in the first century, particularly in the New Testament, we see that going on all the time. Today we're going to talk about the second kind of participle, which is an adjectival participle. Okay? An adjectival participle is going to modify a noun or an adjective or a pronoun, that sort of thing. It's going to work with some sort of a noun. And so you see the example here, the people believing in my name will be set free, okay? Believing is probably what you notice there to be the participle, and that's true, the people believing is all going to be part of that participle phrase, and I'll show you how that works here in just a little bit, okay? So, before we go any further, I need to remind you about adjectives, okay? We learned about adjectives way back in Module 1, and we need to do a quick refresher to make sure we remember these terms, okay? So the first and most common type of adjective we call an attributive adjective. And this is so basic it's almost hard to explain because it's just the basic vanilla normal way that adjectives work. But an attributive adjective gives a quality or an attribute to the word it's modifying. So the example we used was the red ball. Red is the adjective, ball is the noun, and we just have red modifying ball. It's telling us something about the ball in the sentence, okay? That's the attributive adjective, and something we need to keep in mind because we're going to use that same word, attributive, to talk about participles, okay? So when we talk about an attributive participle, it's going to modify a noun in the same way. It's going to add on to the noun. It's going to tell us something about the noun. And just like an attributive adjective and a noun, we're going to have the attributive participle agreeing with the noun it's modifying in case, gender, and number. Okay, that's going to be the way you tell that they go together, is they're going to agree in case, gender, numbers. That's why we got to know our case endings, particularly for those participles that use a lot of those third declension case endings, if you remember that from last time. Okay? Now, here's an example. Let's go ahead and look at this example. Feel free to pause and read and translate this on your own if you'd like. I will go ahead and read it for us as well here. Ha anthropos halagon to aklo esten ha didaskalos mu. Okay? The man or the person, the one speaking to the crowd, is my teacher. Notice how we have ha anthropos and ha lagon there, okay? Those are going together. We can tell that those are both masculine nominative singular. If we can't get that from the words, they both have definite articles there, which helps us, right? So that little phrase on the front, we're going to say, the man who is speaking. Where's the who? Okay? Well, there's no tis in there or has or anything like that. The word who doesn't show up there. But instead, we're just treating that like an attributive participle kind of phrase, okay? So halagon, speaking, or the speaking, is going to modify anthropos. And so we're going to understand that as an attributive adjective to the person or the man, okay? So the person who is speaking to the crowd is my teacher, okay? You see how we got there? All right. What we're doing is we're just identifying the participle. We're figuring out how it works. And this is one of those, you got to massage that a little bit, right? The who is speaking. There's no other esten in there. There's no other is. We have to sort of create that in English. Okay. That's how Greek is going to do it. Now let's talk about another kind of adjective we talked about back in Module 1 when we talked about adjectives. We talked about the substantival adjective, okay? And you may remember this, that it functions as if it were a noun, okay? And the example that we used back then was the righteous will live by faith. Righteous is an adjective, okay? It's not a noun, it's an adjective. But in this sentence, the righteous will live by faith, we're treating it like a noun. We're sort of substituting a noun in our brains in that place. It's really the righteous ones, or the righteous people, or the righteous followers of God, or something like that, right? The righteous ones will live by faith. And I do this to just kind of suggest that sometimes in your translation, you might want to put something in parentheses just to suggest, like, I know this isn't actually there in the sentence, but it's assumed. I'm filling it in the translation. And that's totally fair. If it's calling for it, like in a situation like this, you're free to do that if you would like. Okay? That's part of being a translator, is we have to make those decisions. Okay? What does this mean? What is this pointing to? What is this inferring? As you get to know the language better, you'll feel more and more comfortable doing that sort of thing. So a substantival adjective, the adjective contains the noun. Like, it's, the substance of the noun is in the adjective. Okay? Now, what do you think a substantival participle is going to do? Exactly the same thing. Okay? We're going to have a participle that's going to contain the noun as part of it. Okay, so let me put another example up here. Again, feel free to pause and read and translate on your own if you want to give it a try. Ha lagon to aklo estin ha didaskalos mu. Almost the exact same sentence, right? We just don't have anthropos there, okay? The one speaking to the crowd is my teacher. Notice what we did there? We just took out anthropos. That's it, okay? Does this change the sentence? Well, not majorly. We're not specifying that it's a person. We're just saying the one who is speaking. Could you say the man? You could. The person, something like that. It's a masculine, okay? So it's not woman, the woman who is speaking here, because then halagon would need to be feminine, right? Which it's not. So it's got to be some sort of a masculine nominative singular noun that we're pointing to. So that could be going on in here, but probably we're going to leave it fairly generic, like the one, like that, okay? Just because it's not being super specific by including a noun, okay? All right, so we've got these two different kinds of participles. How do we tell the difference? How do you tell the difference between an adjectival participle and an adverbial participle? Okay, well, a couple ways, a couple hints, okay? The first is the article. You may remember when we were studying adverbial participles last class that we said the adverbial participle will never have a definite article, okay? That's a big hint. If it has an article, it has to be adjectival. And kind of like we saw in the examples, the one who is speaking, that just kind of flows really well to have the on the front of that, right? To make that a definite kind of clause, okay? So if it has a definite article, you know that it's an adjectival participle, okay? If it doesn't, it could be either, but chances are it's probably going to be adverbial, okay? You don't know that 100%, but that's when you got to rely on the second one, which is really context, okay? If you translate all the words in the sentence, that's going to give you a pretty good idea of what's going on with that participle in that sentence, okay? And if you get stuck, we've got resources there to help you. Again, never feel bad about turning to a resource when you get stuck, okay? We don't want to depend on that right away. We always want to try to get it ourselves first, because that's how we learn and that's how we grow. But if you get stuck, the reason we have teachers and scholars in our world is to lean on them when we get stuck, okay? And let's be honest, they all know more than you at this point, right? And so you want to be able to lean on them in those times when you get stuck, okay? We want to be careful that we don't go rogue and come up with, crazy grammatical or, crazy interpretation kind of things, because that's how we get in trouble. That's how heresy gets started, right? We want to make sure we're checking our work, that sort of thing. And as we practice and we get better, that's one of those things that happens, okay? So let's talk about perfect participles, okay? We've learned adjectival, that syntactical piece. Let's start talking about perfect participles and how we build those. Remember last time we talked about present and aorist. Now we're talking about perfect. And those are the only three. There's not like a secret, fourth and fifth kind that are coming around the corner. That's it, okay? So perfect participles are the last participles we learn. They are like perfect verbs in a lot of ways. Primarily that they are completed past action, okay? That past action should have kind of an asterisk by it, right? Because remember, this is outside of the indicative, so we're not talking about time so perfectly, okay? But completed past action whose action continues to have consequences in the present, okay? I tell you that because that is what perfect means, and that's helpful to keep in mind as we do this, even though, again, that sentence kind of has an asterisk by it, okay? Mounce tells us that the default translation will be after having, okay? You may remember that the default translation for present participles was while throwing or while sitting or while driving or something like that. The default translation for aorist participles was after driving or after throwing, okay? We add another word when we're talking about perfect, okay? We say after having thrown or after having driven, okay? Does that communicate the idea of past action that continues into the future? Not really, okay? It kind of doesn't, and we need to be careful about that. We're just somewhat limited, and we we're just limited on how much of that we can bring into the English translation. But again, because we're talking about aspect a little bit more than tense, we don't have to worry quite as much about working hard. Remember what we saw last time with this quote from Mounce. While the basic aspectual difference between a continuous and an undefined participle is still true, the significance of aspect is lessened in the attributive participle and is weaker still in the substantival participle. We're talking about substantival participles today, right? And so that aspect is just kind of weak, okay? So that means you don't have to work quite as hard to bring that aspect into the translation, okay? And actually, you get kind of some strange translations using some weird words if you do that, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and build the perfect participles, okay? Good news, we're going to have reduplication out front. You might say, Nick, why do we have reduplication? I thought we didn't have augments. This is outside of the indicative. We've been dealing with the unaugmented stem. Well, remember, reduplication is not an augment. Those are different animals, okay? Augments go on the front. It's that epsilon out front that indicates past time at points. Reduplication is a little bit different. It's more like a stem change almost. It's still happening to the front, but it's not specifically an augment. So we just have to treat that a little bit different, okay? The good news about that is how easy do you think perfect participles are to spot? Yes, super easy, because that reduplication just stands out front and it just screams to you, that it's perfect. And then you can tell from the middle that it's a perfect participle, okay? Then you're going to have the perfect tense stem, okay? You're going to have the tense formative that we see with the perfect, which is a kappa. Remember, that also stands out. And then we're going to have our participle morpheme for the perfect, which is different than any of the others. And in this case, in this example here, it's Omicron tau, okay? So when we get that tense formative and that participle morpheme together, we get cot, okay? And then we put our case ending on the end, okay? Still those third declension because we've got that tau that's going to end the effective stem before we attach our ending. So we get lelucates, that's the active, okay? That's the active participle, perfect active participle, masculine, nominative, singular, right? That would be the full parsing of that participle, all right? Now here's what the middle looks like. A lot of things are the same. We got reduplication. We've got that same perfect tense stem. We don't have a tense formative this time. There's no kappa. Instead, we just have that participle morpheme. And remember that mana, mene that we saw? Mana for masculine and neuter, and mene for feminine. That same participle morpheme is going to be used for perfect as well. So we get leluminoi, okay? So this one we would say perfect middle passive participle, masculine nominative plural, okay? That would be our full parsing, okay? That's our middle passive. There's no separate passive form like there is with the aorist, okay? Perfect is going to be more simple, and the middle and passive are going to be combined, but that is what the parsing would sound like, okay? Now let's just take a minute or two here, and I want to tell you about this little wrinkle that Mounce wants to tell us about this chapter as well, and it's called the genitive absolute. Okay, this is just a grammatical wrinkle that'll show up that it's good to know about, because as we're talking about syntax a little bit, you want to have this in your tool belt so you can just kind of roll with it when it shows up. Okay, now let's talk about that word absolute. We know what genitive is, but what's an absolute? An absolute means it's a word or a phrase that has no grammatical relationship to the rest of the sentence. Okay, you see what Mounce says here in the book. He says, a genitive absolute is a noun or pronoun and a participle in the genitive that are not grammatically connected to the rest of the sentence. What do we mean by that? We mean that you're not going to have the subject or the main verb or the predicate or something like that. Those aren't going to show up in the genitive absolute. It's just going to be kind of tacked on. And actually, usually it's going to be right up front. It's going to be at the beginning, okay? So let's look at an example. Once again, feel free to pause, read, try to translate this on your own, and then unpause to get my commentary on it. But here goes. I'll go ahead and read it. Egneta de tu diamaniu ex elephantas elaleisen ha kophas. Okay, so we're going to bring the de out front, and egeneta, it came about. And now we have tu diamaniu ex elefantas. That's our genitive absolute. Do you recognize that? We have tu diamaniu, the demon, okay, in the genitive. And then we've got ex elephantes. That's our participle, also in the genitive. I know that ontos ending, that looks nominative singular, but remember, these are third declension endings. That's our genitive ending, right? All right, then we got our main verb, elelasen, okay? And then hakophos. Hakophos is the mute guy. The mute guy, elelasen, cried out, okay? So that's our main sentence. If you were to reduce this to just the subject and the main verb, it would just be the mute guy cried out. But we have this introductory formula here that we see, and it came about, and we're going to add a temporal element, a time element to what we see. And it came about after the demon left or exited, ex elephantes, right, went out, and maybe that's the best translation. And it came about after the demon came out, the mute guy spoke. Okay, that's what happens afterwards. The guy's healed, the demon comes out of him, and the guy who's mute is able to speak. That's what it's saying. But notice that we kind of have that weird construction on the front. We might be confused about why do we have this genitive here and what's going on. Remember, absolute just means that it's not connected to that elales and ha kophos, okay? Doesn't mean it doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just not grammatically related, okay? It's not modifying the subject, or it's not commenting on the main verb or anything like that. It's just kind of adding flavor to the sentence in a different kind of way, okay? So, common verbs that are used with the genitive absolute, laleo, like we just saw, I speak. Lego, also I speak or I say. And ginomai, I become, I be, that sort of thing. We see those a lot with the genitive absolute, okay? So just be on the lookout for that, particularly if you see something in a sentence show up that is some sort of a genitive noun or pronoun, okay? That might be your hint. Like if autu shows up and it doesn't mean his, it's just real hard to place exactly what's going on. See if it's paired with a genitive participle. And when you see those two together, that's going to be your warning. The light bulb's going to go on a little bit and you go, oh, maybe this is one of those genitive absolutes, okay? And so try to translate it in some sort of a timing, a time temporal sort of way and see if that works, okay? So here's another example to try, okay? Again, feel free to pause and do it on your own. Tauta autu laluntas paloi epistusan eis auton. Okay? So the auta autu laluntas, okay? While he was saying these things, the tauta there is substantival. That's sort of the intro, the introduction to the sentence. And then we see paloi, many, epistusan. By the way, paloi also substantival there. It's many people, okay? That's what's assumed, even though people doesn't show up. Many epistusan believed eis auton, in him. So while he was speaking, many believed in him, okay? And so once again, we see that autu, that genitive, laluntas, also genitive. That's going to be our hint that we have a genitive absolute going on. All right? That's just a little syntactical wrinkle we want you to be aware of. Now let's review a little bit. We learned the last kind of participle that we're going to learn, okay? We learned adjectival participles syntactically. We also learned perfect participles and how to build those. Those are different categories. One is talking grammatically, one is talking syntactically, but we finished participles as far as that goes, which is really good news. And then we tacked on genitive absolutes there at the end, which is an important little wrinkle to be aware of. It's just one of those ways that participles can be used that I want you to be aware of, okay? And also remember the conditional sentences bonus video. When you have a few minutes, watch that and spend a little time, look at the handout, that sort of thing. That'll be good to know about as well, because conditional sentences are really important in the grammatical, syntactical things that are going on in the New Testament. Jesus talks in conditional sentences all the time, so it's helpful to know kind of what those are assuming and that sort of thing. All right? So as always, take your time. Feel free to rewatch the videos if you need to. These are here for you. You can spend some time on these. Keep practicing, keep hammering away, continue to be disciplined, and happy studying. We'll see you next time.